Who would have thought that a week ago that the Florida Panthers would be on a 3-game losing streak and on the verge of being on the wrong end of history? But for the Panthers, right before Game 7, Halloween Horror Nights came early.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Saturday, June 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at L_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. You guys hear that, Florida Panther fans? That's the volume. That's the start of the show with the silence that kind of speaks volumes of how I'm feeling. But I do have to do a 30-minute show talking about what has happened with the Florida Panthers after being up 3-0 and now losing 3 straight to get here, now on the verge of being on the wrong side of history for the Panthers. But once again, for the Edmonton Oilers getting out to a multi-goal lead, getting the first goal of the game. It wasn't a shorthanded goal that they scored for them, but getting in on the score sheet after a turnover in the neutral zone. And then for the Florida Panthers, even though they got a goal to get it to 2-1 at the time, overturned by an offside, it was really a backbreaker for the Florida Panthers. And just the first shot for the Panthers via forward coming 32 minutes into the hockey game. The Panthers just never really got their legs going in this one. And once again, just being outplayed. And it seems as if the Edmonton Oilers have just figured things out in this Stanley Cup final. And now it's one game to determine a Stanley Cup champion. But joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, he is someone that you've heard not only here on the show before, but you hear him from time to time on the Florida Panthers Radio Network. And he is the host of Locked On Canes, Miami Hurricanes, that is. He is Alex Donno. Alex, welcome back to the show, and welcome, unfortunately, under these circumstances.
Yeah, Armando, thank you for having me. First of all, I certainly wish I was here for a celebration. You know, Armando invited me on the show before Game 6, so we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I appreciate the invite nonetheless, but this has been frustrating to say the least. You know, when the Panthers had that 3-0 series lead and they lost Game 4, I think we could all stomach that and say, okay, well, you've got the opportunity to close it out, Game 5 on your home ice, and then you can have that celebration in Sunrise and throughout Fort Lauderdale. Now, of course, you could, I guess, say the same thing now that Game 7 comes back to Florida, but I don't think this is what any Panther fan wanted. Panther fans would have been perfectly happy to see the Stanley Cup awarded in Edmonton last night. And yeah, it's continued to be, and I know we'll talk about it throughout this episode, Armando. It's been a different Florida Panthers team for the last 3 games. I'll give credit where credit is due. It's been a different Edmonton Oilers team as well in the positive for the past 3 games, but these mistakes and these slow starts that the Cats have had. I mean, being outshot 11-2 in that first period was simply inexcusable, and it really set the tone for the entire hockey game last night.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, credit to the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, when you think about not only the times that they've generated off the rush for them, but the amount of times that they've eliminated the Panthers' rush chances, something that I spoke about even after the first 3 games. Is like, okay, the Panthers are getting their opportunities off the rush, but it's funny because the ESPN broadcast showed the rush chances, then took them away, then took that graphic away, then put it back once again about even the shot attempts in the games 1 through 3, how there was 12 for the Panthers. And then even in the last 3, there was 1 shot attempt for the Panthers. So it's crazy the adjustments that Edmonton has made. But for the Panthers, I mean, the pressure and the hesitancy with not moving the puck, it's sticking on the tape and just not having the Edmonton Oilers with their heads on a swivel too much when they are in their defensive zone. I mean, that it's really the Panthers doing it to themselves. I mean, Carter Verhaeghe with the pass in the neutral zone, which Sasha Barkov wasn't ready, and then Leon Draisaitl, he's been quiet, but hey, he gets that assist to start off the game too, and also for just a series of unfortunate events for the Panthers when you think about the Gus Forsling trying to keep the puck into the zone on a one-timer, or trying to just golf it in and just trying to stay back, and then the Edmonton Oilers scoring, and then even one of them on a bad line change too, which a 2-on-1 goes the other way, and not a lot of it's crazy to think that multi-goal deficits too. That's really the backbreaker, because both of these games, well, game 5 had a goal 14 seconds after Edmonton took a 2-goal lead. Panthers scored 10 seconds after the Oilers went up by 2 as well, but that goal was disallowed due to offside. But it's not even now for the Panthers. Even if there's a multi-goal deficit and you're cutting it by 1, I'm not even celebrating. I'm just like, okay, and that's how I felt even before the offside review, because why are you letting it get to this place in getting to this in the first place?
Yeah, it really feels like Edmonton over these past 3 games has really sped up. They're moving a lot faster, which is kind of their trademark, but really this has a lot to do with the Panthers allowing that to happen. I haven't seen the same intensity, and you talked about the giveaways, the turnovers, which has really given the Oilers opportunities to kind of establish their game. So really what the Panthers have allowed Edmonton to do, I don't know if it might just be pure exhaustion or what it is on the Florida side, but the Panthers have given the Oilers every opportunity to assert themselves in the series after really completely negating everything they did well over those first 3 games. I mean, people were wondering early on in this series, where is this Connor McDavid, this generational player we hear so much about? Obviously, he has had opportunities, specifically in Game 5, to what he had four points in each of games 4 and 5 to really become a factor in this series. People have been wondering, where is Leon Draisaitl? Leon gets to assert himself in Game 6, and so. You talk about too many times the Panthers have really just been playing too much patty cake in possession and have just given up so many cheap chances to the Oilers, where it's really flipped the narrative on its head, because up until this point, Armando, the Panthers had really been physically grinding and wearing teams down and making every game the pace and intensity level that the Panthers wanted to play in, not allowing especially a finesse, quick offensive team like Edmonton to establish their own rhythm. But that's exactly been what's happening over these past 3 games. And, you talked at the opening, which was a wonderful masterpiece wordsmith opening about, potentially being on the wrong end of history. You're talking about something that could happen. We hope it doesn't happen in Game 7, that hasn't happened since the earlier stages of World War II. Right. If you look at 1942 was the last time a team that was down 3-0 successfully won the next 4 games to win a Stanley Cup. I think it was the Toronto Maple Leafs who pulled that off in 1942. Now, it did happen again in 1945. A team forced a Game 7 after being down 3-0, but they didn't finish the job. So you're talking about 2 occasions during WW2 was the last time in Stanley Cup Finals history you had a team force a Game 7 after being down 3-0. Here we are, and we're trying to keep the unthinkable from happening in Game 7.
Yeah, and you think about, it's funny because I spent a whole episode, not a whole episode, a part of a segment on Friday just discussing about the goals for percentage of when McDavid's off the ice, but he didn't even register a shot in the game too. And it's that's the most frustrating part when you're and like we said, these are broken plays off the rush, not off the cycle. So when you have that speed factor and getting behind, it's really hard to gap up when Warren Fogle, Adam Henrique, Zach Hyman are getting on. And even earlier in the series, even before things started to open up for them, like Matthias Ekholm, Connor Brown too. So they're getting contributions from everywhere. They're winning more faceoffs. They're winning more board battles. They're fighting off the Panthers forecheck too. It's just really they are for the Oilers, they are managing the Panthers style of play. And here we are, a game 7 on Monday night for the Panthers and Oilers, and it will go down one way or the other in history or infamy too for the Panthers, and there's no other way around it. But we're going to continue on this conversation about Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final and discuss the 3 duds and the moment when we thought this game was lost. Excuse me. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With priority last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for sports, concert, comedy, theater, and more. And all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout, and it's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Saturday, June 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Saturday, recapping Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers by a final score of 5-1 in Alberta. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Had to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So, Donno, for this 5-1 loss for the Florida Panthers against the Edmonton Oilers, which now we have a winner-take-all game in Sunrise, June 24th, 8 p.m. from Amerant Bank Arena. And for this one, I'm going to start with 3 duds of the game. And honestly, when you give up this many goals, it's basically automatic, but I don't want to say that the game is on him too. I don't want people to mistake that. Sergei Bobrovsky is my third one. You think that maybe he would have maybe a chance on that Henrique goal, that he went to the far side of top past the blocker for him. So that's basically the only goal that I would say that Bob really had a chance on. Matthew Tkachuk is number 2. We haven't seen that takeover game by Matthew Tkachuk. Yeah, spoke about maybe that he's possibly playing hurt too for him, maybe, but hopefully one more game that they could just battle it out and grind it out just to get that championship. And number 1 is Carter Verhaeghe. After that goal in game 1, off the rush, it's like, what happened? I mean, you don't see him driving to the net. You see him shooting into a blocker. I mean, block shots. Also, in the last 3 games, the Edmonton Oilers block shot differential is plus 30 in these last 3 games for them. So it's very concerning when you're not even getting into Stuart Skinner's kitchen. So those 3 are my 3 duds of the game. Who are your 3?
Yeah, no, I echo your sentiment exactly. You know, there were some flat-footed moments defensively as well. So I might throw a couple of people into that mix. Ekblad and Forsling were completely flat-footed on the first Edmonton goal the other night. But I echo when you talk about Tkachuk and you talk about Bob, when you're talking about trying to hoist the Stanley Cup, you know, first couple of games when the Oilers looked like they were down and out, everyone's saying, well, when are McDavid and Draisaitl going to take over? They've turned things around in the series, right? You need your superstar players to show up. Now, obviously, Sasha Barkov is the Panthers superstar, and he's doing his part. I mean, he had a goal last night. He had another one that was taken away by the finest of margins, and we will talk about that. So he's doing his part, but you definitely need more from Tkachuk, who's one of those that you mentioned, and you definitely need more from Bob, because when you're talking about making Stanley Cup championship runs, usually that comes with a completely dominant goaltender. And Bob has been that at times. Obviously, you're not getting as far as you've gone if Sergei Bobrovsky certain games hadn't been standing on his head. I mean, you've talked about it throughout these Stanley Cup playoffs, but you're going to need Bob to make not only every routine save, but you're going to need him to make spectacular saves in Game 7 if you're going to want to close this thing out. So you need all your superstars to be churning. You could argue the three, or at least three of the biggest of those on the Panthers side, are Barkov, who's doing his part, Tkachuk, who I think needs to do more. It was a crazy, goal line clearance that he had. What was it in Game 5? So obviously Tkachuk is having certain moments in this series, but you need to see more, and you obviously need to see more from Bob.
Yeah, and thought that Tkachuk after making that play right before Connor McDavid scored, and I'm not going to give crap to OEL. I know there's a lot of internet people on the internet, so maybe the peripherals of the bucket didn't really. Maybe he thought that went in from that. So, but still for the Panthers, and it's whenever there's one spark of someone maybe playing up to their level, it hasn't really lasted long. I mean, we saw it in Game 3, for the Panthers, how now the superstars were getting on the score sheet due to forcing the Edmonton Oilers to make mistakes. I mean, you could even argue that even in the last win that the Florida Panthers had, it was because of the capitalizing on mistakes. So now it's turned on its ugly head for the Panthers here. So that's another thing for them. So it's the blue liners for the Edmonton Oilers. Got to give them credit. They're not up in the play. They're not making bad line changes. They're closing the gaps. They're getting that stick near the blue paint to at least get Stuart Skinner to freeze the puck too. So that's another thing for them. But I think we're going to have the same answer on this one when we talk about the moment where we thought the game was lost. And I mentioned earlier how the Panthers, after going to a multi-goal deficit, get it to 1. They did it in Game 5, and maybe that was a little bit of hope. But then the offside review. At the time, I said, no way you can overturn this. No freaking way you can. And I did not see the angle until after the game, because it was the Sportsnet feed that had it. It was like literally a bird's eye view. And it was by like 6 inches. So now that looking at that, of how far offside it was for that one, if you're really like narrowing it in for that one. So, but also for Chris Knobloch, if you challenge that and you lose, look at how great their penalty kill has been too.
Exactly.
Like you don't care. You don't care if
you
lose that challenge. I mean, that was about stopping the bleeding too, and knowing you're at home, and if you some way win it, oh man, the psychological impact that it has on both teams. The team, it changes absolutely.
I mean, it goes to show you, and obviously I'm in agreement with you. That was the turning point for me. That was when I felt like the game was lost, because it's a completely different complexion of that hockey game if that goal counts. And the atmosphere at Rogers Place was tremendous, but they got very quiet when they thought Barkov had just cut the deficit in half, right? And that came 10 seconds after the 2-0 goal for Edmonton. So that would have been a huge momentum shift in the Florida Panthers' favor that was overturned. You saw how irate Paul Maurice was on the bench, and I agree with you though, and we didn't get the definitive camera angle. Maurice didn't actually see it. He's probably seen it by now, but he didn't have that angle during the game. Neither did any of us watching it on TV. So he was obviously irate about it. It was by the thinnest of margins, and he even made a comment like, if the shoe was on the other foot, based on the angle that I had, I wouldn't have challenged that. He wouldn't have thought that there was enough to overturn that. So, Armando, you hit the nail on the head. For Knobloch to have the confidence to actually challenge that play, unless he got the secret angle that, Paul Maurice didn't get, for him to have the confidence to challenge that, you're knowing we're not afraid of the Florida Panthers power play. Why would we be? With the way our kill has been performing and with the way their power play has been virtually, non-existent, you could understand taking that gamble. So I get it. And again, wow, it's a completely different hockey game if that goal goes in. I'm not necessarily saying the Panthers win the hockey game. And it also, it outlines, how much how much technology has changed the game. And I'm not complaining about it, because obviously if I were an Oiler fan, I'd be very relieved that, hey, we have that. It was definitively by a couple of inches. It was definitively offsides. But, years ago, a call like that could never be made, and you would not have enough evidence to overturn. But now, we've got these 4K CIA type of angles, and we're able to make calls like that we never would have been able to make before this era of hockey.
Yeah, and for the Panthers, I mean, I wanted, like, going into Game 6, thinking that making a change to the power play unit for them and just putting OEL on the top, which the Panthers power play got 4 shots and all of them came in one power play. It was the second one that they got after McDavid went to the box too. So that's another thing with how much the Panthers have struggled. And I mean, part of me didn't want to think that they were in the Panthers' head after that. But when you're making a change to the top power play unit in this late into the Stanley Cup final, you feel like that the Edmonton Oilers at this point are playing a little bit of chess, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I think so for sure. And kudos to them, honestly. And man, we're going to talk about everything that's at stake coming up in Game 7, because it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, and let's actually continue that conversation as we transition over to segment number 3. We're going to discuss more about how to emotionally get through Game 6 and going into Game 7, because it's going to be a long 2 days and a long flight for the Florida Panthers coming back from Edmonton as they prepare for Game 7 on home ice. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. And hey, Locked On Panther fans, I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners, the mobile game Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise and better than Bill Zito? And well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team. Play through the season and lead it to glory. Hire the right coaches, staff, draft players, trade, pick, navigate to free agency and the draft. As a Panther fan, there's no off season. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team's chances, and why I think you're going to love this game. Locked On Network listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store, so make sure to check it out. Download the game and visit ultimatehockeygm.app or look it up on the App Store. hockeygm.app. Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. Segment number 3 here on this Saturday, June 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day, as the Florida Panthers lose to the Edmonton Oilers by a final score of 5-1 in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup final, as now this series is tied at 3, and Game 7 is Monday night from Amerant Bank Arena. So, Donno, the Florida Panthers going into this, and I did not say what my panic meter would have been going into Game 6. I did that prior to Game 5 of what it would be, obviously, because I never thought we would make it, we would make it to a Game 7 after. I mean, a lot of people did. Even neutral fans didn't think so. But I would say that my panic meter is right now at an 8. But at the same time, for the Panthers, there's no other lineup changes that you can make for the Panthers to just get over the top too. When it comes down to ultimately the superstars, you can try to put a Nokopozo back in, you can try to put a Lorentz back in too, but it's really about just when it comes to structure and the speed of trying to manage it. That's really what it comes down to, and for me, it's really about coaching at this point for the Panthers. Well, not necessarily, but having it in that meeting, but also implementing that on the ice of still staying tight in the neutral zone, putting multiple bodies whenever they're on an entry too, so that Bob can relax in his crease.
Yeah. I think, to me, really for these next couple of days, it's almost entirely about psychology.
Mhm.
I thought, you're right to say that, at this point, it's been a very long playoff run, and Paul Maurice has done just about every possible line combination and every tweak to the power play you could possibly do. So all of that tinkering, you pretty much know what you have with every combination at this point. I think to me, it's about the attitude, and I'm going to say this, and I mean this with 1,000% of my soul. It's not only about the psychology of the Panthers players. I'll get to that in a second, but I think the fan base can play a role in this as well, Armando, because as they, Amarant Bank Arena, it's obviously going to be full on Monday night. The tickets are going to be very expensive, of course, but Panther fans, if they've stuck through to this point. This is a Game 7. People say Game 7 is the two most exciting words in sports, so you get one of those. But I want to see what sort of energy comes from that crowd, because I'm expecting a very nervous energy from the fans. And I don't think that's really a good thing, right? Where, the first couple of games of the series, you're on your feet, you're yelling and screaming the entire game. You're excited. The team is winning. Now, as we've talked about, you've seen a 3-0 lead turn into a 3-3 and an opportunity at one of the bigger choke jobs in professional sports history. How much of that nervous energy is going to transfer over to the fan base? Because I do think that can affect the state of play out there. But of course, I'm not saying fan base psychology is more important than player psychology. And this is something, again, I was watching Paul Maurice post game after the Game 6 loss, and he said, if you were obviously to go into our dressing room right now, you would have, a lot of anger and a lot of upset people. That's okay right now. Get it out of your system, and then, starting today, Saturday, needs to be focused, and you need to have that sort of professionalism. And I expect that, and Captain Sasha Barkov also talked about it after the game, the opportunity. It doesn't seem like he's dwelling on, what's led to this Game 7, and everyone needs to have that focus, one game at a time. The only thing that matters is the game in front of you. And something that I would certainly hope to see, Armando, is we've, a lot of times I like to say this, in the playoffs, whether you're talking Stanley Cup playoffs, NBA playoffs, whatever, that, you don't always see momentum carry over from one game to another, but we've definitely seen that over these past couple games where Edmonton has been able to carry their momentum over. Hopefully the Florida Panthers can fit that narrative. And I also wonder, how much physical exhaustion is there going to be on the Edmonton side at this point? Maybe they're still just redlining on adrenaline. Right. But, to dig yourself out of a 3-0 hole, that is a physically and mentally exhausting thing. And now you're back in Florida for the decisive game. So I'm hoping to see some kind of an adrenaline dump when it comes to what Edmonton's done to reach this point. And hopefully the Florida Panthers can handle their business. But bottom line is, every player in that dressing room, you need to completely forget what's happened over these past 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
You've got it's a 1-game series now. 1 game, winner take all. This is all you need to focus on. Games 4, 5, and 6 do not matter. This is a 1-game Stanley Cup Finals series. You have to focus on that, and you have to play at your best and cut down on the stupid mistakes, please.
Yeah, and for me, the last 30 minutes of Game 5, if you look anything like that from start to finish, you're giving yourself a good chance to win for the Panthers there, even though they were behind there at the time. But you saw a little bit of that and how they fed off the crowd, especially when there were 16 minutes to go in Game 5, and seeing how close the Panthers were and the push that they created. Although things for the Edmonton Oilers were still very tight. And
also, let me add one thing as well. Please score the first goal. Right.
Yes.
Because, and I know the Panthers, regular season and at points in the playoffs, they've been the comeback cats. It doesn't matter. They're down 2-0. They're down 3-1. Doesn't matter. But in this series, it has mattered. The team that scores the opening goal is 5-1 so far in this series. I believe you have to set the tone early. And that ties into the nervous energy. This crowd at Amarant Bank Arena, if Edmonton scores the first goal, it's going to get very quiet and very nervous. The Panthers need to start the party.
Yeah, Panthers 2 out of those 6 games where they were first on the score sheet for them at this point. And it's crazy. Also, you mentioned momentum, and part of me doesn't want to believe that it could go from game to game, but I can't lie. I can't lie when I'm seeing like what has been in front of us too with the eye test of these last 3 games for the Oilers. I mentioned earlier the block shot differential in these two, the chances off the rush. I mean, got to force them into a cycle somehow for them. I mean, the Kachuk line didn't even get a shot attempt after the first period too. So that's another thing for them. So that's really how much the Oilers have really neutralized the stars of the Panthers too. So that's it's going to be very tense. It's going to be, it's like you said, nervous energy for the Panthers going into game 7. And listen, if we saw Bill Zito throw 1 water bottle after game 5, but if you threw 4 of them behind the scenes after, he did all the work. He did all the work. He put the Panthers in this position. Now it's up to the players.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And like you said, and I thought you said it best there. Really, there's only so much more that Paul Maurice, obviously, he can maybe play a role in that psychology and kind of setting the example for the attitude. But I think Barkov is probably even more important in setting that example. But yeah, Bill Zito and Paul Maurice, their job to this point is pretty much done. It's up to those players to do it.
No doubt. And with game 7 being Monday night, fun fact, I heard about this this morning. This is the first post-COVID game 7. So it's been a while since we've had a winner take all for all the marbles in the final round to determine a champion. We didn't think it would get to this point, but the Panthers, one more fight. That's all you need. Just one more fight. And can you do it? And like you said, nothing matters from even the 3 victories that you got. All that matters is game 7 Monday night, and there'll be a lot that is going to happen from now and then, because the Panthers are likely going to hit the ice again. We're going to hear what they're saying, and we'll break that down right before Monday's game 7. But Donno, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Even though it came into with a loss for the Panthers, losing 5-1 in game 6, still glad to have you on the show. Tell everybody where they can follow you and your work online, my friend.
Well, thank you so much, and I have a great time every time Armando invites me on. And yeah, I'm on this. I actually host 2 shows on this network, Locked On Canes. You can find me talking Miami Hurricanes football and basketball, and you can also find me on Locked On ACC, where we're gearing up for football season coming up there as well. So there's a lot of different places to find me, and I always love talking hockey when I can. So Armando, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Donno, and hope to see you very soon, my friend. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Alex Donno, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.